Thank you guys, and good morning one more time. My name is Pat Hollinger, and I'm one of the members here, and from time to time I have the opportunity to speak, and am fortunate enough to do that again today. Garrett is down in Alabama. Alabama happens to be one of the places where a lot of churches converge for this conference, and Garrett goes down there with a lot of other churches, and it's an amazing fundraising effort, and so some of Mission City's best partners kind of come from this conference, and so Garrett's down there right now. And so we're going to be continuing this morning in the message series that we've been in, which is the message series of the strange sayings of Jesus. And I've really enjoyed this message series because if you kind of have grown up in the church, or you're kind of just picking up the Bible for the first time and you flip to the New Testament and you read the Gospels, you might flip through and you can kind of read a couple pages at a time. And oftentimes you'll like gloss over what's being said, and you might recognize a famous verse. And one of the verses that we're reading today, I think, is kind of famous. And you kind of go past it. You're like, yep, I need to apply that to my life. And then you kind of go to the next verse or go on with your day, and you don't really pause to think about like how the word I was thinking, which is like modern, is like unhinged some of these sayings were. Like some of the things that he says in the context of history and what was going on culturally were really strange. They were really different than what would have been accepted at the time. And so today is no different, and we're going to be able to examine an awesome verse. And before we do that, I'm going to talk briefly about if you're in the working world in some capacity, if you're anyone other than like an entrepreneur where you're your own boss, one of the most important relationships that each and every person has is the relationship with their boss. And you can have like amazing bosses, and from experience, some of you guys might have like terrible bosses, and you can know that that relationship is really important, and it can influence almost every aspect of your day. If any of my bosses currently or down the road listen to this podcast, I've had only great bosses. But you know, like one of the traits of an amazing boss is like this concept of like servant leadership, right? Where if there's an amazing win for the team, they immediately are like, well, the team is great. They give credit to the team. When in their one-on-ones, it's all about like, you know, how are you doing? How can I help you? Like, how can I make your job better? How's your career advancement going? Like, how can I help you? And then the opposite end of the spectrum, like the terrible bosses, one of the major traits is like it's all about them, and everyone knows it's all about them. This job is like a stepping stone to their next role. They treat everyone, the team, just like an employee. They're going to burn you out and work you down to the bone. And if there's like a great win, they're going to immediately step into the limelight and be like, okay, this was all on me. And I think that this concept of like being selfless or being selfish is applicable in many aspects of our lives, and it's going to be the topic that we're going to be talking about this morning, is this topic of serving versus selfishness, because I think we interact with it quite a lot, and we have to do a little bit of reflection ourselves, and how often are we on any side of the spectrum. And like my vocabulary will kind of like change, but like when I say selflessness or serving others, like that's kind of the same thing. And if I'm saying selfishness or being self-centered or self-serving, it's kind of the same thing. And I think that we need this message this morning in the current context of like the Western world more than perhaps like ever before, because this concept of, you know, doing everything, like it's all about me. It's all about individualism, and like what was like, I think 100 years ago, this concept of, you know, taking care of your mind and your body like wasn't really that existent, and it became like a good thing where it's like, you know, if you need to take care of yourself, you need to take care of yourself. But like I think individualism and like this self-care mantra like molded into this reality now where you can literally rationalize any decision. It's like, well, I was doing it for me, and like I really just had to do this for me, and like people will like let you get away with things that like 100 years ago or even 20 or 30 years ago would have been wildly unacceptable culturally or societally, with like, well, you do you. You know, if you've got to do that for you, just do it for you. It's okay. And like that is unbelievably selfish behavior if you're rationalizing things that can have major negative consequences on other people. And it's like this hashtag, you know, no judgments culture that we live in. Where it's like I would never judge something if you're doing that for you. And so I think it is that all I think can be wrapped up in this desire where it's like I am doing something because it serves me, which definitionally is what selfishness is. And so the concept that you would live your life with a goal of serving other people has like completely exited the public domain as like that being a major lifestyle choice, outside of if you're serving other people only for your own benefit. Like the concept of serving other people just to serve other people has completely exited the public domain. And so I think hearing what Jesus has to say on this topic is important for us, not as Christians, but just for today's society. And so we're going to stop 4 times throughout this text. The first 3 times are a little bit more negative, and then we get to hear what Jesus says, because the disciples are like perfect reflections of us at times. And so we're going to hear about how all of us might be a little bit more self-centered than we think, and talk about why I think that may be, the consequences of being selfish, and then what Jesus says about how we should actually live our lives. And so if we jump into the scripture here, some of the disciples' verbiage, again, when you really, really slow down, is unbelievable, and they come right out of the gates with that. And so if we pull up the scripture, it says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him being Jesus, said, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.'" Which, again, if you just read that, like the disciples have many great moments, and they have some like not great moments. And this is James and John specifically. They're kind of like having a one-on-one conversation, and they go up to Jesus and say, not like, "Can you help me out with this?" Not, "Can you have a favor?" "We want you to do whatever we ask." Like we just watched you heal someone over here. We understand that you are clearly, of a different variety, and we want you to do whatever we ask of you. Even though you called us to follow you, we want you to do whatever we ask. It's like, I think about the question, it's like if you could have lunch with anyone, current or history, and you answer Jesus, and you go to that lunch, and you're like, "Whatever I ask, I want you to do." It's unbelievable. But it sounds like it's craziness, but when you think about it, it's this concept that I think that they were applying, and that I think we want to be applying, that innate in our human beingism is that we want to be served, which is the first point. And outside of the like secular ways that I think like society is dominated right now of this like me individualism culture, I think that it applies in maybe not so harmless ways that's kind of like seeped into the public domain, even within like our Christian lives or every part of our lives. And I think about the how culture today has just shifted even more towards a being served culture, and not only a being served culture, but because we are used to being served a little bit more now than maybe what would have been 20 or 30 or 50 years ago, we now demand and expect service to be perfect and to be luxurious, and we love to nitpick the jobs of people in the service industry. And I think like one of the classic examples that I think about that it's just crazy how far we've come is the invention of Uber, right? Like 20 years ago, and it's nothing bad about Uber, but 20 years ago, the idea of being driven around in a private car service would have been viewed as like pinnacle luxury. Like you are some executive and you have a private driver, or you're being driven around in a limo was like is pictured on TV. And now at any point in time, you can have a private car service. And while that should be an amazing luxury, because we are so now used to being served and have such this strong desire of being served, how often, if you've been in a cab or if you've been in an Uber, do you get out and like the car was too cold, the car was too hot, the Uber driver talked too much? It's like, oh, they didn't talk enough, the music was too loud, they were playing the top. I mean, it's like we nitpick all of these things, and it's because we just have this desire to be served at every intersection of our life. And I think that we do it with all types of people that are in the service industry, and I don't think that's the way that we're called to do it. And I think that also, if you examine your prayer life, you might find that because we're so used to doing it in everyday life, we might find that we start to do this with God a little bit. If you think about your prayer life, it might be limited to like, God, can you please help me pass this test? Can you please help me get a boyfriend or girlfriend? Can you please help me get this job or more money? And there's a difference between like a father figure and the relationship you have with your father, and that of one you might have like with a business associate. With a business associate, it's like, all right, we're on this mission together to achieve this common goal, and so I'm going to ask you for things, and we're going in the same direction. And I feel like we can treat our prayer lives like that, versus like the relationship with the Father. There's love, there's respect, there's reverence, and there's this understanding that there's provision. But I think because we're so used to being served in everyday society, we've moved into this relationship with God where we can just call on him for things. Please do this for me. Please do this for me. Please do this for me. And I am very guilty of this and had this, my own experience with this that I reflected on and was like majorly visible a couple of months ago when I was able to do the New York Marathon. And for context, in 2022, I ran the race, and long story short, I had a pretty rough experience where I kind of got hurt mid-race, and like after a lot of walking and jogging and like gritting of teeth and being very hot and miserable, I finished. And so 2024, 2 years later, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this again, and it's gonna be this redemptive experience. And I pulled out all the stops. I hired a PT and a run coach, and I really committed to this training plan, et cetera. And like 3, 4, maybe 6 weeks ahead of time, the same issue that had caused me issues the first time was starting to like pop its way up. And like the entirety of my prayer life was like, God, please let me do this. Like, please, you can heal me. And it was like, nothing else was prayed about for the 3 or 4 or 6 weeks ahead of time. And then day of the race comes, and I ended up being able to do the race successfully, but it was like right at the moment where I got hurt the first time, I was like, okay, 3 more miles, God. Can you do 3? Thank you so much. You've helped me so much. Can we just do 3 more miles? And it was like every 3 miles, it was just, this was all that I was praying about. And I got done, and I was able to do the race successfully, and it was like one of the best days of my life. It was redemptive, and like people would ask me about the race, and I did not mention God a single time. I was like, oh yeah, it was amazing. I did all of these things. And then in the couple of months following, it wasn't like, God, thank you so much for healing me and for allowing me to do this. It was like, on to the next thing. Okay, God, can you help me with work? Can you help me with this other thing? And it's so easy to slip into that mindset where in the couple of months before and the couple of months after, my prayer life was so focused on the needs of me. And it's because I think regardless of the secular ways, us as Christians are just so used to being served and that we want to be served. And so that's where the story of the disciples saying, we want you to do whatever we ask, is not that foreign. And I think that, of course, dependence on God is a good thing. We are called to be dependent on him. We have nothing outside of him, which we're going to talk in a second. But selfishness can be sneaky that way, right? Where you start off with having a good thing where, you're trying to take care of yourself or you want something good, but then it can easily turn into a sin whenever it becomes so focused. And so clearly I think we've established we all want to be served in some capacity, and probably more often than we think. So if we return to the text, let's look at, I think, why that may be. Jesus, with just infinite grace, responds to that question, what do you want me to do for you? And they replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in glory. And Jesus says, you don't know what you are asking. You drink the cup. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? We are able, they answered. So not only do they ask, Jesus, can we do whatever we ask? Jesus then responds and says, what do you want? Can you do this? Like, he's clearly saying, I don't think that you're able to do the thing that you think you are asking for. And again, boldness of responses says, we are able. And so and they just believe that they can do anything, and it's just absolute boldness. And I think that the reason they do this is similar to us, in that I think the reason that we want to be served at every element in our lives, and the reason we can have responses like the disciples have, is because we overestimate our own self-importance. The rooted in the human condition from an early stage, of course, is you have to survive, right? If survival is key to the human condition, and so because survival is key to the human condition, you have to take care of yourself, you have to eat, and you're constantly thinking about yourself in some capacity to live. But I think, again, society has just shifted us so much more to the right of that, and especially I think it's true in the Western world, where capitalism is like ingratiated into everything that we do, where it's if you work hard, then you're important. If you make more money, you're important. If you look really good, you're more important. If you're an amazing athlete, we celebrate all of these people. And so naturally, every single person tries to go down one of those paths in one way. And in doing so, every time you take a step towards progress, there's this comparative nature where, well, now I'm one step better than someone else, and I must be more important than them in some capacity. And so we just have overestimated our own self-importance. And I think that's why once you think of yourself so highly, you then, of course, want to be served because you're so great. And it's a little bit relatable with the disciples. Like, they've been called to be among the 12 with Jesus. And so Jesus is saying, I'm the Son of God, and I'm choosing you 12. And so it's not, they must think they're pretty important. And so that's what enables this type of boldness. And another famous example where I think we see this is in the parable of the prodigal son. And so if you're not familiar with this parable, it's a parable of Jesus where a father has two sons. He's a very wealthy father and owns this estate and has lots of resources, and he has two sons. And the younger of the two sons comes to him and says, "Father, I want you to give me half of my inheritance right now. What I'm entitled to when you pass away, I want you to give it to me now." And the father says, okay, and gives him his inheritance. The younger son goes off, spends all of his money, gambles, prostitutes, the whole thing, and loses all of his money. He then says, whenever he's down at his worst, he says, even one of my father's slaves is having a better life than I am and is getting fed correctly and is at least sleeping in a sheltered way. I'm going to go back to my father and ask for his forgiveness and ask if I could at least be a slave working for him. Meanwhile, the older brother stays at home with his father the whole time. And so the younger brother comes back, and from a long distance, the father sees him, celebrates him, and says, "Oh my goodness, my son has come home," and throws a huge party, and is just so overjoyed that his son, who he thought was lost, has come home. And you pick up the story of it's kind of all focused on the younger brother, but then you see the perspective of the older brother, who I think perfectly demonstrates this idea of overemphasizing self-importance. And he's working in the field whenever he hears about the party, and one of the other people in the field is there, and he says kind of what's going on. So I'm going to pick up the scripture where the person responds to the older brother and says, "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And this story is intended to be about the amazing grace that the father shows to the younger son, but the older son is completely blinded by his own self-importance. He's like, "Look, I've been working for you this whole time. Why don't I get anything?" And the reason for that is because he believes that he is so important. He's completely forgotten the fact that he's had all of these years with his father where they've just been in relationship. He's completely forgotten that the only reason he is going to get anything at all is because his father is this successful person that's going to give him an estate. He forgets that he's going to get an entire estate from his father when he passes, because all of that is forgotten, because there's this one instance where his younger brother is being celebrated, and that happens with us, and that's the natural thing that we do, because we overestimate our own self-importance, and we believe that we're so important and so good and deserve everything. And the reminder that I give to all of you guys is that everything that we have, similar to the older brother, was given to us by our Father. Our traits, our humor, our looks, our work ethic, our friends, like every aspect of our life was given to us by God. And I've heard people on stage say that before, and like my response was like, well, I've worked so hard to get all of these things, and like Garrett has said right back, it's like, well, who gave you the desire to work so hard? And so it's relatable, but it's a good reminder to devalue our own self-importance. Like the natural response when thinking about our lives and when we try to like climb these different ladders in the different ways I alluded to, you should just take a step back down, take a couple of steps down, and just be reminded that the only reason you have anything is because God gave it to you, and we should just be humbled and be in this service mindset, which we're going to get to a second. Lastly, the third thing we're going to get into is the consequences of self-serving or selfish behavior. I think we all want to be served. I think we want to be served because we overestimate our own self-importance, and then we'll look at the consequences of that. And so Jesus responds to the disciples saying, we are able to do this thing, and says, Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And so it sounds like what clearly was happening is James and John are kind of talking to Jesus off to the side, and they have these bold requests. Jesus responds gracefully, and then they kind of come back together with the other 10, and the 10 are like, you guys are crazy, which is the natural response. And the word indignant means strong displeasure, annoyance at something that's unjust or insulting, which is the response that anyone is going to get whenever you're around someone who is constantly being selfish. And so the third point is that serving self has consequences. And I think that you know this whenever you see it to the extreme, or even someone a little bit who is selfish in a bunch of different aspects of life. And I'm going to name a couple. If you're constantly serving self, you'll drive people away in relationships, and no one will want to be around you in any sort of team setting. If you ever played a sport or you've seen it depicted, it's like no one likes the ball hog who, if they get the ball, they always hold on to it themselves. And I feel like it's something that happens when you're little kids, but you know who that person is, and no person likes to have that person on the team or be around that person. Similarly, in one-on-one relationships with friends or coworkers, it's very easy, and I think we've probably all been there to see that person. And you can think of that person where you go get lunch with them or you go get coffee with them, and you might ask them 10 or 15 questions. How are you doing? How's this part of your life? How's work? How's your family? How can I help you? And it turns into an hour and a half long conversation where you ask them an hour and a half of questions, and they responded, and not once did they think to check in on how you're doing. And no one wants to be in relationship with that type of person if that continues. I think that self-centeredness also can be the root and can be the path of people going down paths of addiction and other things, where if you're so focused on me all of the time, you're naturally going to want to say, okay, how can I make myself feel better? How can I either temporarily or in some other way go after a sexual experience or a drug experience that's going to give me a temporary feeling of a high? And then lastly, I would say in a practical sense, whenever you just like Google, I think, secular things around selfishness, it also inhibits personal growth in any way, because if you're a selfish person, anytime something good happens around you, you're the person who's going to say, well, that was all because of me. And anytime something bad happens around you, you're going to say, well, that was all because of other people. If you live in that mindset and framework, then you will never be open to potential feedback, because good things happen because of you already, and bad things happen because of other people. And so if you constantly live in that, then it's impossible for you to have ever done anything wrong, and you can't actually grow in any sort of way. And so I think in a bunch of different ways, you can see that self-serving behavior has material consequences and is not the way that you want to live. And so finally, after watching all of this, the bold questions, the bold response, and then the disciples becoming indignant, Jesus is like, okay, enough is enough, and decides to step in with like, okay, here's how it's actually supposed to be. And so if we go to the text one last time, it says, Jesus called them together. So he brings everyone back together and said, you know that those who were regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so the first thing that I want to call out, I think you could do an entire sermon on just those set of verses, is that we're called to a higher standard as Christians. And that's the first thing that Jesus is calling out, that he says it to the disciples, that is applicable to you, where he says, you know how those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. So the first thing that he says is, you guys are supposed to be different. The ways of the world and the constant selfishness behavior and the me culture all of the time and lording power over them, not so with you. So out of the gates, he says, you are supposed to live in a countercultural way. The second thing that he says, and this is the strange saying, right? In the world of Roman rule, where people are going to exercise authority, where power is everything, where there's meaningful differences in classes of society, he says, do not climb the ladder, do not try to focus on yourself. The countercultural and strange sayings of Jesus is that if you want to be first, you must be a slave to all. You must serve many. Serving is the key idea here, and serving is what is life-giving, which brings us to our fourth point, which is that serving others is life-giving. And so if I compare some of the negative consequences that I just went over of how serving self has consequences, and go to the other side of how serving others looks in each of those areas, instead of driving away people in relationships, your relationships will flourish, because in your relationships, you're going to be the person who is able to bring other people joy. You'll be able to help them out. You'll be able to ask them questions. You'll be able to be that bedrock when someone is struggling. Instead of going down these paths of, okay, how can I make myself feel temporarily good through drugs or sexual experience or partying or anything, you can focus so much of your life on saying, God, how can I further your kingdom? How can I serve other people? Give me an opportunity to serve today. And doing so will take you to exciting places. You'll get to meet exciting people and interesting people, and you will have the opportunity to bring so much joy to other people. And if anyone has served in any capacity, they know how much joy you can get from doing so. And that is the life that you get to live in. When you're living that life and you are constantly getting filled up from the joy that you can bring to other people, you immediately don't have any need to try to distract yourself with some of the other items. If you think back to the story of the prodigal son, instead of being so upset and there, later in the parable it says there's gnashing of teeth where he's so upset and angry about how his father is treating the younger brother. He could have had the opportunity to go in and be reunited with his brother, have the opportunity to celebrate with his father and enjoy this party and celebration. And then lastly, what I was just saying a moment ago on kind of the practical sense, if you are not selfish and you believe that it's possible that good things happen because of other people, or you might be responsible for bad things, you are able to improve, because you're going to realize that it's possible that you can get better and you can be open to feedback, and your life can improve from that way. And lastly, if those potential just life improvements aren't enough, we see the final response from Jesus and what he specifically says. If we could put the verse back up there. The final portion says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." So if we think about first Jesus' life while he was on earth, he lived a perfect life that was entirely service-oriented. So we have the perfect role model of what this should look like. He goes out and lives his life with the outcasts of society, with not the ultra rich people. He goes and tries to help people where the people in society that he thinks that other people would consider to be invisible. He goes out and lives with them and lives with sinners and tries to serve them, and every aspect of his life was an ultimate act of service. And then finally, he says, not to serve, but to give his life as a ransom for many. And what he's saying is this is the core of the gospel, is that ultimately all of us have sinned and fall short of the perfect requirement that would be necessary to live a life where we would be able to be with God forever. And so we're all sin, and the punishment for that would be life eternally apart from him. But instead, Jesus comes and lives this perfect life and then gives up his life so that all of us have the ability to be with God forever. And that's the core of the gospel, and to believe that. And think about what the natural response of someone dying for you should be. Like think about the soldier who's the soldier next to him gave his life for him. Think about how indebted he would feel for the rest of his life. Think about how much he would go and serve that soldier's family. Think about how much he would just constantly have a service-oriented mindset. That should be undeniably the standard that we should be living our lives to. Jesus gave his life for us. He literally gave his life so that we can be with God. That is the ultimate act of service. And so the natural response of gratitude should just be that you should just be overflowing with a desire to then serve other people. And if you're like, okay, I'm bought into that idea, some of the ways that you can do that are there are plenty, and I'll give you a couple of examples. It can be through Mission City. One of the organizations that we partner with is the Bowery Mission. Bowery serves breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day of the entire year. We will go and serve with them usually about once a month. If you want to serve with us, you can. You can also go at any point in time and you get to serve people who are in need of food and bring unbelievable joy to them. It's an amazing organization. You can serve financially by giving, and it can be little things like going out of your way to help people. Like if you know that someone is struggling, saying like, why don't you come over for dinner and let me cook for you? Or if you don't want to leave your house, let me cook for you and bring you over to dinner. Let me order food and come over and just check on you and love on you. In a work setting, it can be staying late so that you can help someone on an assignment that's struggling, or picking up extra shifts for someone. Like in society, the not so with you part of the text really struck me. And in society, we should be viewed as Christians as irrationally serving other people. You should be known as being different than everyone else because of how much you're serving. Like it can be viewed as like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I serve, and there's like, okay, that's part of your reputation. Or it could be within a work setting. It's like, oh wow, they irrationally help other people around them, and they want to serve people at every opportunity. It should be so much so that someone should ask you, and then you can say, oh, it's because I'm a Christian. Let me tell you about it. Like that's how you can be different in society, and that's how you can be called out. The last the example is like if you are in a relationship and you're married and you can look at your partner, serving spouse is a very easy way and your life immediately gets better. If it's like running errands, if it's going to get groceries, if it's doing the dishes, if it's doing laundry, like I know that both my wife and I, if ever one of us does the other without being asked, it is an immediate marriage improver. So that's the last practical sense that I will give you. So if you go out, as you guys go out this week, I would just think about in the little ways how we're called to be different and not be so selfish. Like devalue your own self-importance and devalue how much you want to be served because you think that you're self-important, and reflect on the consequences of how being so self-centered, the negatives that it can be, and then think about the ways that we should be different and that we can serve. And I'm going to end this morning with a quote from Tim Keller that I think is just amazing, and I'll read it a couple of times so it sticks. He says, "We were made to serve God and others." So our literal DNA, how we were made, is to serve other people, and it's to serve God. That is what we were designed to do, right? The quote continues, "That means paradoxically that if we try to put our own happiness ahead of obedience to God, obedience being serving God and others, we violate our own nature and become ultimately miserable." And so again, the moment you try to put yourself first in your own happiness and importance and desiring to be served at every aspect of your life first, you are you're literally violating your own nature, which is how you paradoxically end up miserable. And that makes sense, right? Like the people who are constantly nitpicking every little aspect of their life and the people around them and they're miserable, right? And the people who are the most happy are the people who are putting themselves second and serving in every capacity, which makes sense because that's how we were ultimately designed to live. So let us pray, and then we'll continue on with some music. Dear Lord, thank you for the gift that you have ultimately given us with your Son, that Jesus came and lived this perfect life and ultimately died on the cross for us. He, in this example, just watches as the disciples are just like how we are in every day, where we focus so much on ourselves and focus on how we can make ourselves better, and we want to be served, and we overestimate our own self-importance. Thank you that in the amazing grace that you have, you are so patient with us, and despite all of the constant desires to put ourselves first, you came and died an excruciating death so that we might have life with you forever. I just pray for our church and for this congregation and for the churches all over the world, just that the Christian community would be known as being different, that in our workplaces, in every aspect of society, when we go out, we're the people who are going to lend the helping hand. We're going to go irrationally above and beyond to help other people, which is the way that we were made. There's a reason that when we help other people, we feel so much better, and society functions so much smoother. It's because that's what we were designed to do. We were designed to serve you and to further your kingdom, and we were designed to help other people. So I just pray that everyone would just be able to go out and do that a little bit more today and this week and this month and this year and the rest of the years, that we would just go out and serve you, because that's how we were made, and also because that is what ultimately you did for us. Help us just be reminded that you gave your life for us, and our cup should be just so overflowing with gratitude and with thanks that we would go out and serve others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.